Okay, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining. This is a great turnout. I really appreciate it on a Friday, the end of the conference. I know that people are probably a little worn out from all the sessions, but I hope to make this an interactive opportunity for you to contribute your thoughts on this topic of making live online classes engaging and inclusive. So just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Schedler. I'm a professor in the English department at Central Washington University. I teach literature, American literature, multicultural literature, including American Indian and Latino, Latin American literature. And I've been teaching online, well, asynchronously online primarily for the last 15 years or so. But this year, of course, with the transition to remote learning, having to do more online teaching. And so that was a transition for me, certainly. And I've just been trying to, gain insights from other people in terms of best practices and putting it to practice in my own teaching. And I just wanted to share some of those insights with you, some of my experiences, some of the tools that I use, some of the pedagogical approaches that I take, and then also hoping, to hear from you all who are teaching or helping faculty to teach in this modality. So yeah, as Brandon said, there'll be opportunities for you to engage in the chat. I'll ask you some questions, and then at the end, hopefully there'll be some time too for, if you want to, you can jump on and unmute yourself, and we can have a little discussion, questions that way as well. Okay, so I'm sure many of you have seen these kinds of surveys that came out, especially last spring, in terms of the challenges that faculty and students had in keeping engaged in online classes, and particularly with the shift to remote learning, the use of live online classes in particular as a transition from face-to-face. And so some of these surveys showed that, faculty felt like one of the biggest challenges for them was keeping and increasing student engagement in class. Over 50% in this survey from last spring by Titan Partners felt that that was a major challenge. And students themselves felt that the online class experience was unengaging for them, 78% in this survey by Top Hat. They also, looking down a little bit further, if you can see, is 39% said they didn't enjoy or see the value in real-time online learning. And of course, there were a lot of expectations that it would be exactly the same as face-to-face, or that they were comparing it to face-to-face. And certainly it is a different modality, and one that we have to be aware of in terms of adapting the tools and our instructional pedagogy to meet that challenge. And I think, of course, a lot of faculty have been engaging with those challenges and trying different things. And the surveys that have come out more recently this year probably have improved on this, but this is kind of where we were starting from last spring. So just to start us off then in the chat, if you could say, what challenges you as a faculty person or your faculty, if you're an instructional designer, have faced in getting students to engage in live online classes, that would be great just to kick us off. Give you a few minutes to put in some insights into the chat. Discussions presented are not always applicable to the student. Learning the technology is a challenge. Anyone else want to share? Total silence from the students. Reluctance to let students work together in groups or do group work. Great. Reluctance to change. Varying levels of willingness to speak, turn on camera, answer questions. Some students do a lot, maybe none at all. So different levels of engagement or longer classes, an hour and a half, the Zoom fatigue, reducing the fear of students speaking online, adult learners okay, traditional 18 to 20-year-olds seem to struggle. Okay, great. Yeah, those are all definitely challenges, some that we'll be able to address here. And filling a 3-hour class with only 7 students, yeah, figuring out how to get them to engage, get them talking, get them over, some of the technological challenges, some of the fears that they have speaking online, all really good things. So we'll try and address those as we go along. And if we don't get to in my presentation, we'll talk about them at the end, letting go of live online classes. Asynchronous, certainly that's something that I've had a lot of experience with and done quite a bit. And so, yeah, I'm doing both asynchronous and live online classes for my teaching load. So just some things that I've tried in terms of getting students engaged right from the beginning. Before the class begins, I send a welcome email. Before, once I've opened the class in Canvas, we use Canvas as our learning management system. I will send that out to them to let them know that it's available to them, that they can go and check it out. I remind them when our first live online session will be taking place. And because we have an integration with Zoom into Canvas, they can find the links to all their class sessions within Canvas. And really with all the tools that I use, I try to use tools that integrate with the learning management system as a way to minimize that kind of cognitive overload for students, that they can go into Canvas, find that as their main kind of dashboard, and then access all the tools within Canvas. I give them, some links to test their audio and video for Zoom ahead of time. I ask them to go through the class and an announcement that gives them the organization of Canvas. There's some virtual class meeting guidelines that I give them that I will talk about on a different slide. I have them complete a student experience survey to talk a little bit about their educational experience goals, but also their life outside of academics. And I'll talk about the different questions that I have on that survey and some of the data that I find. And then using that information that I get from students to really help make them, make the class inclusive to everyone, getting a sense if they have technology issues that we're going to have to address, or if they have concerns about the class. I like to get that information ahead of time and then use it as I'm interacting with students as we go through the class. We also have a class notebook, the OneNote product from Microsoft that's integrated within Canvas. And we use that for collaborative documentation during breakout groups, but I also have them use it as a sign-up sheet, and they get some practice then. Initially, they'll go in and sign up for a presentation date, and they'll get registered into OneNote, and that helps prepare them for when we start our live online classes. They're familiar with and have already engaged with that collaborative note-taking tool that we use during the breakout groups. I also have students do introductions within Flipgrid, which is a video-based discussion platform. And that just gives them an opportunity to try out their webcam, their microphone, and give an introduction and start building our sense of community. And so they will post their video introduction, I'll post one, other students will post, and they'll respond to each other. And that starts, laying the groundwork for building that sense of community that hopefully then will translate into our live online sessions as well. So I mentioned the student experience survey that I do, and this is a survey that I just have within Canvas as a Canvas survey. And so I can get the statistics and the data right within Canvas. I took these questions, throughout this past year. I've been kind of engaging with different sessions at online conferences that talked about inclusivity, and so I wanted to build my own kind of survey, and I took some questions from other surveys and put mine together. Karen was asking a question: you make sure all the tools you use like Flipgrid are accessible? The ones that I am looking at primarily are the ones that are integrated into Canvas by our instructional technology team. And so for the most part, I'm kind of relying on them to do that accessibility check. But if there are any issues that come up, in terms of students and using those tools, I'll definitely give them alternative kinds of opportunities. So like if there's a need, they can do a text-based introduction rather than doing a video introduction, something like that. So the student experience survey, these are just some of the things that I'm looking for from the students, their preferred name and gender pronouns, so that we can use that, in our interactions within the live online classes, their education and career goals. I ask for some student characteristics, like, is this their first term on campus? Are they first gen college student? Are they a returning student, completing their degree? Are they a caretaker? For one or more other people, their housing status, their employment status, expected hours that they will spend on the course this week, just to give me a sense of, how much time they feel like they can devote to the course. I ask them for an academic strength that they bring to class, a question or concern about the class, and just some ideas about what they feel help or hinder their learning in general in classes. And so this just gives me some sense of where they are, any issues that they have in terms of this class, and anything that I can address going into our first live online class. Some of the data that I've gotten back from this is interesting, and this may vary, obviously, depending on your students and the demographic of those students that you're teaching. But for our institution, Central Washington University, I found that a third of the students were first generation college students. Over 50% were returning to college to get their degree. 30% were caretakers. 55% had a job during school, and a little less than half were working 1 to 10 hours per week, and 30 to 40% 11 to 20 hours per week. So it definitely gives you a sense of the amount of time that they are having to work while they're taking these classes. And certainly you run into that quite a bit in terms of students asking or letting you know about their schedules. And during this time, when they're probably taking classes from home and working as well, I think there's even more stress on students in terms of having to balance their academics and their workload. Then I also asked them about their online technology that they have access to for this class. So do they have reliable internet access and quality in terms of stability and speed for their online schoolwork? What type of hardware are they using for online meetings? How are they connecting? Where are they connecting from? And I also asked them about their preferred modality in terms of live online or asynchronous, or what we call self-paced online, or both. And so that definitely gives you a sense of, some of the expectations that they have. We have within our department a fully online degree program, and those students are primarily adults. They're geographically bound usually in terms of their work or their family, and they're working adults, and so they have expectations that they primarily want asynchronous, self-paced online courses. And then you have the students, that were face-to-face who are now transitioning to the remote learning. And so it was interesting to me to find out whether, they preferred having live online classes or whether they also would prefer the asynchronous. And what I found, and this is obviously a small data points because just a few classes this year, but of the students that I had, 100% had reliable internet access, and about 60 to 80% had high speed access and stability. There were a few each quarter. We were on the quarter system that had less reliable internet access, and we did have to manage that sometimes in terms of allowing them to keep their video off so that their audio was coming through, and sometimes having them come on and off of a session because they were being dropped. 95 to 100% had a laptop or desktop for their schoolwork, which was great, and 95% had a webcam or microphone for the live online class meetings. I only had maybe one student each quarter that would have to use a smartphone to come into the sessions. 90% were connecting from home, 10% from school. And in terms of which online learning modes they preferred, about 10 to 25% preferred live online, 40 to 45% the asynchronous self-paced online, and 44 to 45% said both. And so it is interesting to think about the ways in which we, even if we are doing asynchronous learning to meet the needs of these students, ways that we can incorporate live synchronous sessions into those to allow them to have that interaction, that connection. I do think there is a desire on the part of students to have that. So it is something I think to think about as we move past this phase into the next phase, when we need to think about how we balance out the asynchronous and the synchronous learning. In getting students prepared for class, I mentioned that I have them go through a virtual class netiquette guidelines. And so this, I have a netiquette for asynchronous discussions, and I'm sure we're all familiar with that, but there was some new things I think that had to be addressed with virtual class meetings, in terms of preparing their learning space, making sure that they had a location that, if they could, minimize noise and distractions. The ways that we always talk about having, for me, I do prefer them, if they can, to have their video on and their audio muted. I do like being able to see people's faces, have them just raise their hands, physically, rather than having to raise their hands with a button. I do make allowances for people, as I said, if they want to keep their video off, if their environment doesn't allow for them, to feel like they can share that with their video on, that's fine. But for the most part, I usually have between, about 75% of students will have their video on in a class. And for me, that allows me to make connections, see how people are responding to what I'm saying. And then, because my classes are so discussion based, I'm asking questions, and I want their responses, and I want them to be able to raise their hands and just unmute and start speaking. I tell them they can change their background. If they want to have a virtual background, they can. Their screen name, so they can put their preferred names and pronouns. I try to talk about, having them stay focused within the class while we're having our class session. So not multitasking, no distractions or unauthorized guests. I talk about how we'll use breakout groups and the chat, and that the sessions are recorded so students can go back and review them afterwards, or if they miss a class. And then during our first class session, I do use like an orientation slide at the beginning of class. Most of them are probably familiar with Zoom at this point, but I do just like to introduce them to the environment so they know that they can choose a virtual background, that they can rename themselves. And I ask them to send a chat message so that at the beginning of each class, just how they're doing, if they're having any technical issues that I need to know about on that day. And then, just how they can raise their hand with their video on, or use the button to raise their hand. Then for each class session, sharing virtual class meeting guidelines, yeah, I would definitely be willing to share those. Just send me an email, and I can share those with you in a Word document. So before class, each class session, I do ask students to do some kind of pre-class work to prepare themselves to come into class. And usually this involves, because we're reading novels and articles, they'll do a response within a Canvas discussion, or if we're reading an article that I can post within Perusall, which is a social annotation tool, if you don't know about it. It allows you to upload digital files, digital materials, PDFs, Word documents, even videos. You can, and have students do social annotation on them. And so students do some pre-class work, whether they're responding to a novel that we've read or responding to one of these articles. I'll have them post a question, an initial response, some quotation that they're interested in, and then they'll have that with them. You know, they've already thought things out, they've written things out, and when they bring that to the class, they don't feel as, I guess, fearful or anxious if I cold call on them at some point, because they have already prepared that response that they can read from or they can speak from. And I will also print out a copy of all their responses before class and read through them, so that I then can refer to those and call on people based on their responses in terms of the discussion. So, you know, if the discussion is on one topic and I've seen that a student has already written about that in their response, I can call on them and say, I see, you know, you discussed this topic within your response. Do you want to elaborate on that? And so I think that's a great way to deal with this silence that you get sometimes if you ask a question and no, you know, there's just crickets, no one's responding. And so you can use that to then help people get more engaged in the discussion and not feel like they're fearful about being the first one to talk. So I found that to be really helpful, really useful. And Perusall, I think, is a great annotation tool for students to engage directly with the text and be prepared for having done the reading. You know, you can see who has done the reading. You can see how they're engaging with it. You can see if they have questions that you need to address during the class session. And so that I found that to be a really great pre-class kind of tool. So then in class, you know, there's a variety of activities that we're going through, whether I'm doing short lectures or asking discussions, I'm having the students do presentations, engage in a large class discussion, but I also do use breakout groups. And for the breakout groups that we use in Zoom, I do create this collaborative note-taking document. And I think I've heard in other sessions, you know, that this is kind of a best practice, and you can use Google Docs, or you could use Padlet, or you could use other tools. So like I said, I just use Class Notebook because for us, the OneNote is incorporated into our Canvas LMS. And so that, again, is just one less step or technology for students to have to register with or find. And so for the breakout groups, I create a template, and I'll list the questions that I want them to address. And then I create a table for each of the groups. And I ask them to, within their groups, once they get into their breakout groups, they will identify a facilitator for their group to, you know, keep them on time and to move them through the questions, a note taker to take the notes on this collaborative document, and then a speaker who will present the work that the group has done back to the class when we reconvene. In the breakout groups, I also ask a fast friendship question as kind of an icebreaker each time they get into groups. And I have random groups, so they're with different people each time. And so it's just a way for them to quickly kind of get to know each other and just speak to each other and learn something about each other on a more personal level before they jump into their academic kind of work. And I found that students appreciate that. Sometimes some of them, just want to jump into the work. They don't want to spend time on talking about their personal aspects. But I do think, during this time period when we're so isolated in our own little bubbles, it's nice to just share something about ourselves that are outside of the academic environment. So they'll do a fast friendship question, then they'll get into the specific questions that I'm looking for. And they'll be taking notes directly on that class notebook, which I will have up while they're in their breakout groups. So I can see, how they're progressing through the questions. If I see that they aren't typing anything in or they haven't identified roles, then I can go into a group and I can, intervene. I can make sure that everything's going right, that they know what they're supposed to be doing, that they're staying on task. But for the most part, I found that I don't necessarily have to intervene in the groups if I can just follow along on this collaborative document as they're working, so that I know that everyone's on task, that they're progressing through their work. And then this also serves as a great way when they come back to the full class Zoom session, that I can see what they've worked on, the ideas that they've talked about, and then I can facilitate the discussion based on the topics that they're dealing with. And sometimes I'll have the groups work on all the questions, all the groups work on all the questions. Sometimes I'll divide it up. So group one will work on the first question, group two on the second question, that way. And again, that it really helps in terms of facilitating that discussion when we're in that large group. And it also allows you, again, then to hear from different people. So each time they go into a breakout group, I'll ask that someone different be the speaker. So that allows people, sometimes there's some people who want to talk and they're absolutely happy to be the speaker. And sometimes you have to draw out the speakers a little bit more. So if they all get a chance to change roles throughout the term as we do many of these breakout groups, then they all get a chance, to speak for their group, which is great. Student presentations, I do in our Zoom classes. And for these, I usually ask students either we have an article or I have them choose an article that's related to the literature that we're reading, and they'll present the article in a summary and do discussion questions. I also have them do kind of media projects where they'll create slideshows or videos or audio related to the literature that we're reading and some topic that they're interested in. And then they'll present this, their material, their research in our Zoom class. I like to get their materials, their slideshow ahead of time, and I'm the one who does the kind of presenting of the slides. So they're just doing the talking. They don't have to necessarily worry about, advancing their slides or sharing their slides. I do that work, and then they can just pretty much do the narration during the class. And I think this is another great way to hear from different students, to have them take ownership over their education and to become an expert in a certain way in a topic, and then they present that to the class. And then I usually, during the class, have them also come up with some discussion questions so that they moderate the discussion. And that's another great way to kind of distribute the authority, but also in the voice and the speakers throughout the class. So it's not always them listening to me talking, but they're hearing from their peers. And then they are also bringing questions that are of interest to them to the class. If they come up with a discussion topic, sometimes they come up with things that I hadn't even heard of or thought of. And so it may take the discussion in interesting directions that you wouldn't have necessarily thought it would go in. And so I think that's another great way to get people engaged and participating in the classes. So I wanted to ask you all if you have tools that you have used or that you suggest that faculty use to engage students in online classes? Other ones, if you want to just share that maybe you have used? VoiceThread, Jamboard, Kahoot for polling and stuff, Nearpod, Bubble.us for mind mapping, great. VoiceThread also, Google Jamboard, yeah, seems like quite a few people use those. Polling, Poll Everywhere, Turning Point. Make or build something and share it. Okay, so using like some physical construction and then sharing it virtually. Delicious for group bookmarking. Great, so just different ways that you can get them engaged, collaborating with each other, interacting in tools that are either, you know, within or outside of their Zoom session. Those are all great. So I just wanted to share some of the comments that I got back from students in terms of, I specifically asked them within our student evaluations, you can create custom questions. And so I asked them, you know, the last couple of terms, what they thought specifically of the Zoom meetings and the interactions and engagement that we did within those sessions. And, you know, for the most part, it was pretty positive in terms of they like the collaboration, they like the discussion to share and hear ideas from others. The student presentations and lectures, the breakout rooms as a change of pace. It's interesting that they also want to see their peers on camera as well, because they have to stare at black screens, you know, just like the instructor does. And so it is interesting that they want to see each other. We think about, oh no, you know, they just would prefer to be off screen, but actually they want to see their peers as well. And then they also talked about how they maybe need more breaks, especially someone mentioned like a 3-hour class. And my classes are usually about an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes. And so they wanted to have either a few more shorter breaks or maybe a longer break where they could actually go get something to eat or, you know, take a little bit of a break from the class. And so I definitely do think that that's important to give them a break, you know, every hour or so to just let them stretch and re-energize and come back to the class a little bit more focused. And on that topic, I think it is important to think about Zoom fatigue, which is now kind of being a little more researched and theorized in terms of what that means when they break, they need to turn off their videos. Yeah. So make sure that they're not sharing something that they wish they hadn't shared, I guess, if they get up and they don't have any pants on or they have their pajamas on or something like that. Yeah, hiding self-view, that's something that we'll talk about. So some of the things that I've been reading about Zoom fatigue, you know, that when you have all these faces on the screen that you're looking at, it's like being this close, you know, to multiple faces, and that eye contact, that close distance, that intensity of that can be fatiguing, that all these faces are watching you nonstop. And so there's this sense of kind of surveillance, or that you're always having to reflect or evaluate on how other people are seeing you. That there's quite a big bit of cognitive overload when you're trying to interpret people's reactions through often kind of nonverbal cues from their faces, and you don't necessarily know exactly what they're thinking. The self-view that someone mentioned, always looking at yourself and being kind of critical of how you look on the video, heightens anxiety and makes you, you know, engage in this kind of self-evaluation. And then, of course, being on video and seated means that you're not moving around. So those breaks that you can take and to get up and move around and re-energize are really important. Nonverbal communication, people are mentioning, important for English learners to follow along, to follow what's going on. For those who have trouble hearing, great. So some people have mentioned some of these things in terms of combating Zoom fatigue, hiding the self view, so you don't need to check your own appearance all the time, allowing students to turn off video when not speaking, which I mentioned, or if the video is using too much of their bandwidth so that you can hear their audio and not necessarily have to have them on video. If you use, or if your students use an external webcam, they can change their position and location, so they're not always having to sit at a desk. They can be standing up. They can be in a more comfortable position. Taking a break every hour, as we talked about, to move and recharge. Asking them to avoid multitasking, you know, to be focused on your Zoom session and not have other windows up and other programs going at the same time. Using the speaker view. So if you choose not to have the gallery view, but to have the speaker view, you can just focus on one face and not have the sense that there's all these faces looking at you. I tend to use the gallery view because I want to see everyone's faces. And like I said, I want to ask a question and have students be able to physically raise their hand. So I want to see them. And I can also, you know, when we think about the shift from face-to-face to Zoom classes, in face-to-face classes, you know, you can see when someone wants to say something, but they're not raising their hands or they have an idea. And you can, I've found that I can get a sense of that too through Zoom if I have the whole gallery up and I can see their faces and I can call on someone because I have a sense that they want to say something, but they haven't raised their hand. And so I do appreciate that opportunity. And even sometimes, you know, with Zoom, you get to see their faces up close. Whereas, you know, in a classroom, especially when we go back and we're socially distanced and we're wearing masks, is like, how are you going to be able to read these faces of the people who are right in front of you? Whereas with Zoom, you know, you can see their faces, their full faces, and you can get a sense of maybe what they want to say or when they're confused. And so I do find that that's helpful. But you can also minimize the gallery view so windows, so that window so faces are smaller and that doesn't seem quite so overwhelming or intense if they're all staring at you that way. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left of our session, and I just wanted to see if we could maybe have some discussion if people are willing to get on a video or unmute and share some of their own kind of best practices, or if there are questions that you have for me about the things that I'm doing. I think that would be great to just have some interaction. So feel free if you want to unmute. Oh, 10 minutes left in the session. Okay, so we have 10 minutes left. Well, we still have some time. Does anyone want to get on and share or share something in the chat or questions that you have? Other ideas that you have, Scott?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Chris, for everything. And yeah, I'd love to hear what other people are doing too. I just wanted to share briefly. One thing that we have done is to encourage students to build something or make something and then show it on their screen to everybody else. And that's really conducive to taking some photos and pictures and stuff too. Yeah, so for example, we were talking about neurons and the structure of a neuron in a brain. And we had people build a model of a neuron just from things around their house, right? And be really creative and, you know, come back later and show what they built. And people really loved it. It was really fun. And we got a lot of cool pictures and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I'd love to hear what some other people are doing too.
That's great. And so what's your discipline?
This was a camp for neurodiverse learners at the University of Washington.
Okay, great.
Yeah, yeah, they were learning about brain science.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, in terms of bridging that virtual and the physical world. So if they can engage with their physical space and then share that through this virtual space, I think that's really great. One of those articles that I mentioned on the Zoom fatigue talks about how we have multiple sets of skins. Like we have the skin of our body, we have the skin of our clothes, and then the third skin is this kind of space around us, and how the virtual skin of this screen that we're looking at, becomes this other mediating space between us, and how can we better uh, engage with others through this third skin, and that might be a way to bridge that kind of virtual and material world. Anyone else want to share? Mary had a question about why students are getting tired after studying online for a long while. And I think that, yeah, I haven't seen like specific scientific research about it, but there are these two articles that I posted on here that are starting to kind of theorize about why some of that might be for this Zoom fatigue, or not just Zoom, but any kind of computer mediated technology that's going on, why it is that we're having to process more things, and the cognitive overload that comes with having to deal with the technology and interact with people through this realm seems to make people more fatigued. So it is interesting to think about why that's happening. Treasure hunts was an idea too that can be fun and done in chunks. I will send my email through the chat right now in case people want me to send them my slides. I don't have a link to the slides, but I'm happy to share that with you, as well as any of the materials like the virtual netiquette guidelines that I have. I would be happy to share any of that with you. One thought: too much talking and not enough doing or thinking. Culturally, we are not comfortable with silence, so the teacher just keeps filling in silences, and that creates fatigue, in my opinion. Yeah, I think that's an important thing. Within class discussions, we often say, like, ask your question and then wait 5 to 10 seconds to allow students to think about it and to formulate their thoughts, and then they will fill the silence. But there is a sense in which, instructors tend to try and fill that silence themselves, and then that may depress the responses of other students. So I do think staying silent is a way to induce people to talk as well. Conference Discord, there's a channel where I can share information to. That would be great. See if anyone else. Oh, someone's having some technical problems with Discord, so that is something that you have to deal with, I think, and just being flexible with students, especially during this time period, and giving them the opportunity to, if they have some technical issues during a session, they can view a recording afterwards, and that's really important, or giving them different ways in which they can complete their assignments, share their knowledge. I think all that's really important, especially during this time period when they're all stretched really thin. Anyone else want to get on and talk? If not, we can wrap it up, and I definitely appreciate all of your contributions and your thoughts and your ideas about this. It's something that we are all having to, address right now. And like I said, I think that it's something that's going to continue with us into that post-pandemic, wherever we get to. So the more that we think about these as best practices and ideas that we can share, I think the better. So yeah, happy to connect with anyone after the conference, and yeah, I look forward to finishing up the conference with you all. Thank you for attending the session. And Brandon, thanks for hosting.